Okay, I'm back with another video. So I was in my car the other day listening to music. I was thinking to myself, let me make a video on how sound works. I don't think most people know how sound works, so let's talk about it. So we gotta first talk about some anatomy. So the outside of the ear, the part we see, is called the auricle. This thing right here. It's just the anatomy term. And then we're gonna go with the earlobe. So we're gonna go more familiar to less familiar. The earlobe. Then we got the ear canal. We got some earwax in there. Then we have the eardrum, right? And then we have the middle and inner ear. And in here is where you got all the magic that happens, okay? Inside the ear, you have these three bones, right? Labeled, I have them 1, 2, 3. These tiny little bones are called the malleus, incus, and the stapes or stapes. I say stapes, it might be stapes, I don't know. Anyway, these are called the auditory ossicles. This is how small they are. Like, they're extremely small, okay? And you also have the semicircular canal. That mainly has to do with balance. I'll make another video on that. That's really interesting. Then you have the cochlea. The cochlea is like this snail shell-like structure that is directly related to hearing. And then attached to all that stuff, you got some cranial nerves. 7th cranial nerve, 8th cranial nerve. The cranial nerves basically connect with our brain and allow us to perceive things like smell, taste, sight, hearing, all that good stuff. So let's zoom in on some of this stuff to see how that works. Okay, so you're walking in a park, you hear people talking, you hear music, you maybe have some earphones on, I don't know. You hear a loud sound. Let's talk about how that sound gets converted so that we can understand it. So here we have the eardrum. Let's say sound waves move through the eardrum, or moves through the ear canal, hits the eardrum. The eardrum will kind of vibrate, pushing on these little bones, right? The malleus, incus, and stapes. Or I'll just say stapes. And then these little bones hit and bang on this window-like structure called the oval window. And the oval window then moves and wobbles. It moves into the cochlea, but in the cochlea, there's this fluid. And when the ossicle hits the window, it moves this fluid. And when the fluid moves, it moves these little structures in the bottom called hair cells. So let's zoom in to see what these hair cells are all about. Okay, these hair cells are attached to this whole structure called the organ of Corti. And they stick out on the bottom, attached to these, these cells with these nucleus and everything like that. And as the sound waves in this liquid move, these hair cells sway to the side like grass on a windy day. So if you zoom in again, we kind of see some more specifics. So these hair cells right here, these purple structures, they have these little openings at the end of them. They're only opened when that liquid moves, right? Like I said, like grass on a windy day, they open up. And then we have potassium, right? This ion that floats around. In the human body, you have a few ions that regulate everything. Just know that the body operates with this yin and yang principle. There's got to be a balance with everything. Here, in this case, the hair cells open up. Potassium, these red blocks, moves into the hair cells, into the cell the hair cells are attached to. And then you got a couple other things that happen. This looks a little crazy, but I'm going to explain it. Like I said, there's got to be a balance with this thing, right? These ions are charged. So you got potassium Then you have calcium, and they both have different charges. All right, potassium's +1, calcium's +2. So when potassium comes in, calcium also comes in, right? Move a different color. Let's do red. Calcium comes in. But because calcium has a different charge, potassium has to also move out. Don't worry too much on the charge, but just understand, right? The potassium gates open like water in a dam, and then there has to be a yin and a yang, a balance in the cell. And that's achieved by the movement in and out with potassium and calcium. So potassium moves in, and when it moves in, calcium, these gates open, right? And these gates open because there's now a charge difference, right? You got all these positive charges moving in, and that kind of opens the gate, right? Just like if you had a garage and you have a garage opener, right? Pressing that button produces this frequency that the garage receives and opens. Think of that like this. Potassium moves in, turns on these calcium gates, they move in. Then potassium has to move out to regulate stuff. Once a calcium moves in, these little blue rectangle boxes, they bind to these receptors on this structure, and this structure is called the vesicle. Think of it like a medicine ball with some marbles in it. Calcium binds to these receptors, and these vesicles move towards the end of the cell and release their contents. So calcium binds, it basically tells, hey, vesicles, let's move out and release our contents. The contents of these vesicles are the chemical glutamate. Glutamate then moves out and attaches to a nearby structure. And when it attaches, it sends a signal that connects to the cranial nerve number 8. It receives this signal and tells the brain, hey, we have a sound. This is what it is. Okay, so to review, we have these waves of this liquid that moves in the cochlea, opens these gates, right? Like water in a dam. Potassium rushes in, okay? And again, there's a yin and a yang. There's a balance to the cell. Once potassium rushes in, because it's charged, it has these positive charges, right? That opens these gates, these calcium gates, right? This little red structure right here. I'm just gonna move some of this stuff so it's easier to see. But like I said, like that's the garage opener, right? It sees the charge, opens the gate, calcium comes in, potassium starts to leave, calcium binds to these vesicles, these little sacs, and those sacs move to the end of the cell, releasing glutamate. Then glutamate binds to this cell neighboring the big one, and then it sends a message through the 8th cranial nerve, or the vestibulocochlear nerve is how it's called. And that then communicates to the brain, hey, this is the sound, this is what it sounds like. This is a very, very basic explanation. But we see calcium, potassium, and glutamate. Those are responsible for us hearing. So let's zoom back out and just briefly go through this stuff. We hear a sound. Someone's talking to you. You hear music. It hits the eardrum. The eardrum moves the malleus, incus, and stapes. Stapes bangs on that window, which is connected to that snail-like structure. And in that structure, there's this liquid. The liquid moves. It moves these hair cells, right? And those hair cells are in an environment where there's these ions, right? In this case, there's this potassium. The potassium floods in, right? like water in a dam. And when it floods in, it turns on these gates where calcium's kind of sitting out waiting. Calcium comes in, right? There's a balance, like I said. And because of that balance, once calcium comes in, potassium has to move out. And then calcium binds to these receptors, right? Like Legos connecting or cars in a parking space. And these receptors are on these little sacs, and these sacs contain glutamate, right? And when they bind, it tells the sacs, hey, travel down the cell, release your glutamate so we can communicate this message. Glutamate gets released, binds to this other structure, what's connected to the cranial nerve, sends a message. And because glutamate binds, there's a specific message that's received through this nerve 8, and that communicates to the brain what it's hearing. Now, that's a very basic explanation. There's a lot more details to it. But that's how we can hear with chemistry. Now, sound is more complicated. There's frequencies, there's vibrations, there's high frequencies, low frequencies. But in general, this is how the human body hears. If you have an imbalance of these chemicals, hearing gets affected. So that's the video. I just wanted to give a very brief explanation as to how things work. Again, thank you guys so much for subscribing and listening. So please like, comment, subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please put them in the comment section. I'll be happy to answer and have some discussions. Again, I appreciate everyone. I hope someone at least learned something new. I'm going to continue putting out videos of all kinds of interesting topics. So thank you again. I can't thank you guys enough. And I'll see you next time with another video.